Who among us hasn't hit bottom once or twice and at the hands of wicked people? Too often our eyes and hearts are troubled as we see those who have done great harm to others and sinned against God's commandments, rewarded and honored. Why are things the way they are? And I've entitled this one, Why Good Things Happen to Bad People. Maybe you remember back in the 90s, I think it was, that a famous rabbi, wrote a book called Why Do Bad Things Happen to Good People? And we get the title, and it's true. I always kind of liked how R.C. Sproul dealt with that. He said, well, it's really not a problem because there are no good people. We're all sinners. So, and of course, he's stating that from a biblical standpoint. We're all sinners. What do we deserve? We deserve judgment. But let's flip that idea around. Why good things happen to bad people? Because that's really what Solomon's talking about here. One of the problems that Solomon is seeing as he deals with how to live for God in a fallen world under the sun, where sin is everywhere, where everything is full of vanity and vexation of spirit. How is it that if we know right from wrong, then why do good things happen to bad people? Well, of course, the answer we know is the fall. I really feel like in many ways, this is a little bit of the issue that we have with the college age group. And not just in this era, but probably even as far back as the 50s and 60s. When the hippie movement started, that was, who were those? Well, those were the rich people's kids. That's primarily who they were. I mean, nobody says that, but that's what it was. I mean, most Americans, their children were at home or working jobs. They weren't part of the hippie movement because they needed the money. It was, so who had the ability to lay around in public parks and do drugs and write songs? Well, that would be the children of our politicians and our rich, more well-off people in our country. But here's the issue that I feel like, or the failure that it seems to me, and I believe that Francis Schaeffer addressed this too, is that the church, by and large, did not engage the hippie movement. The church looked at them, said, you guys look ridiculous, with your outfits and your music and your hair and all of this stuff. It's just, you just look like clowns. And so they just wrote them off. And we made the engagement by about the length of their hair, the style of their clothes, and the way their music was, and so forth, which are all surface level arguments. We did not give them the credit that they were thinking much deeper than that. But now a lot of the thinking they were doing was non-traditional Western thinking. Many of them were getting their philosophy and thoughts from Buddhism and Hinduism and many of these things. But the church wasn't digging deep enough to deal with that. All we wanted to do was smack their hands for looking weird or smelling, not taking baths and things like that. When we should have looked much deeper than that. Solomon in Ecclesiastes did a whole lot better job of engaging the utopian lie that they bought into of communism and socialism and all of the utopian ideas that they're still pushing now, even though they're not young people anymore. And we see that many of them have not converted from this, but have then transferred that into their children and grandchildren, so that it's just coming back to us now in the form of woke theology and this kind of thing. Why? Because we haven't dealt with the thinking. They're looking at this world and they think they can fix it. Solomon is dealing with that issue. The issue of the plight of man. Why are things the way they are? Why is there injustice? Why doesn't God fix that? Well, that's what he's dealing with here in this section. So a popular myth these days, and you've probably heard it, maybe it's bothered you, is the belief that in the moral judgment of history. You've heard this? History will be the judge of that. Somehow, in this thinking, history, which is collected and written by sinful men, has some objective, independent power or authority to pass down to us a judgment upon someone or some event. We talk as if that history, which is an abstract, is going to bring down judgment on people who are doing the wrong things, believing the wrong things, or certain events. Just like you hear many of them say, the universe did this, or the universe hasn't done anything. The universe just exists. It doesn't make any decisions. It doesn't run your life. It doesn't have a will of its own. It doesn't power itself or anything else. It is not prescient. It's not conscious. And so this is a myth. It's true that the passage of time and cooler heads and new perspectives can bring to light hidden motivations and facts that help us discern the truth more readily. That's true, and if that's what we mean, that's helpful as it is, but that's not judgment. And neither does it mean that all will know and adhere to the evidence. There's things that has been proven, but we still, the general population doesn't see it. As far as I'm concerned, the resurrection of Christ has been proven, but the world doesn't believe that. We could say other things as well. If we watched a while back, if you remember on Sunday night, the search for the real Mount Sinai. Remember that? Did anybody remember that? Please raise your hand. Okay, thank you. I feel so much better about that now. But that program, documentary dealt a lot with, that what is now, if you went on a tour, they take you to what they call Mount Sinai. But the truth is that could not have been Mount Sinai. We found Mount Sinai. There's evidence that the Jewish people were there. There's carvings on the rocks. There's everything that we would need. But does the general population know that? No. So time can reveal evidence, and in that sense maybe have some judgment on what was being lied about at the current time. But that doesn't mean everybody's going to accept it. And that doesn't bring down any kind of ramifications to the misdeed that was done. Too often our eyes and hearts are troubled as we see those who have done great harm to others and sinned against God's commandments rewarded and honored in the houses of the holy and the halls of community and government. Solomon decries this as a terrible vanity in this fallen world. It is a source of disillusionment and discouragement to the godly and to the poor. Koheleth, or Solomon, does not settle with his conclusion in the first 9 verses that we looked at last week. That is, that wisdom, though having limitations, can help protect us when evil rulers suppress the righteous people in a given society. He continues wrestling with the problem of why it seems that evil people experience good in life. I'm sure you can relate to such questions. Who among us hasn't hit bottom once or twice and at the hands of wicked people and had the thought come to our mind, why did God allow this? Why didn't God stop this, both in our own life or in the world? Well, first, as we try to digest what Solomon is doing here, we have evil oppressors are often buried with honors. That's a tough one, isn't it? He says in verse 10, then I saw the wicked. So remember, he's Koheleth. He's the wise man, the lecturer, the preacher, the not necessarily the prophet, but the one who observes and develops understanding based on God's commandments and what he sees. He takes on the cloak of godlessness. In other words, he takes the devil's advocate many times so that he can wrestle with the problem. And so he says, then I saw the wicked buried, and they used to go in and out. Where? Where would you see the holy people, the wicked people go? The holy place. You see what's amazing to me oftentimes, we even had on our YouTube channel just recently, somebody made a really negative comment about the authorities in churches, that, what do they call them, the sociopaths are in government and churches, and, they want to be deacons and pastors and bishops and all this kind of very cynical attitude toward authority. And what I wanted if that person was sitting here tonight, I think they could get the answer to this if their heart was open. No one decries the presence of evil people within the holy place of God more than God himself. I mean, to act like the Bible doesn't condemn religious hypocrisy, it shows you've never read the Bible, both Old and New Testament. Here's Solomon saying, I tell you, there is a real vain thing in this world, and that is the wicked who get an honorable burial, but they've gone in and out of the holy places. And he says, and they were praised in the city where they had done such things. You ever seen that? Evil men praised? I remember not too long ago being in Barnes & Noble. I'm not blaming them. It's just, it was a bookstore. And I looked down, and there was this world leader, leader of a country, but, you would know he's known worldwide. He had died, and somebody had written a book about him, and it was all over the news. It was all over the papers and the internet, and everybody's talking about this biography. And, I looked at Lori, and I said, I'm just blown away. Everybody's celebrating this man. He was bloodthirsty. I mean, he killed innocent children. He threw people on the fire, burned them to death. And he's praised here like he's some kind of liberator. He was a murderer. It's a great example. And that's happened many times throughout history. So he says, this is a great vanity. This is a great injustice that wicked people who are clearly powerful go in and out of the houses of holiness, and they operate in the city, with power and authority. So much so that one author says this, they're buried with honors, with praise by the city. Well, no longer are these people alive. So if you knew what they really were, but you were afraid of them, well, they're dead now. You don't have to pretend any longer. So what this commentator was saying was the people literally came to believe that these are good people, that they deserve this honor. That's the world we live in. See, many today look out at the world and they think, well, this ought to be the case, and these people ought to get this and ought to get that, and that's unjust, and this is unfair. Well, good luck fixing that. Here's the man of God saying, this is just awful. Derek Kidner, a great theologian and scholar in the prophetic writings here of the Bible, he said this: there are few things more obnoxious than the sight of wicked men flourishing and complacent. Yet wickedness, respected and given the blessing of religion, is even more sickening. As if it wasn't hard enough to swallow that the wicked often acquire the rulership over people, the writer in Ecclesiastes says that they are often praised in spite of what they have done. Such action promotes more evil in the long view. This is where he's going with this. But this, you say, well, Pastor, this is just so Old Testament. The Old Testament's about judgment, and the New Testament's about grace. Oh, my. Well, I hope we don't accept such tropes as that. James chapter 4, which happens to be in the New Testament, James says, "Come now, you who say, today or tomorrow we will go into such and such a town and spend a year there and trade and make a profit." Wealthy, powerful people. Not all wealthy people. I'm not trying to say that. Neither is the Bible. But it is dealing with the powerful, wicked people of this world who use their power to oppress the truth or suppress the truth and oppress the poor. He says, yet you do not know what tomorrow will bring. What is your life? For you are a mist that appears for a little time and then vanishes. Instead, you ought to say, if the Lord wills, we will live and do this or that. As it is, you boast in your arrogance. All such boasting is evil. So whoever knows the right thing to do and fails to do it, for him it is sin. And he goes on to say, those farmers during that time, he says, you who bring in your slaves and you work them and then you don't pay them. He says, you need to realize you have a master that you will answer to someday. And I know we're living in a time where in America, something that we Americans have not felt since the Revolutionary War. And that is, we have rulers that, by and large, they haven't been voted in, but they have the biggest budgets in the history of the world. They have an army to serve and do whatever it is they command. And you and I don't have one ounce of vote or ability to stop them or fire them. So we can get a little bit of a taste now, can't we, of what it feels like to have wicked people in office or in power who are suppressing the truth and oppressing the poor. And there's nothing you can do about it. So we see that, well, what's the end result of this? When this happens, he says, something else happens. Well, this is connected to injustice. Those that want an oligarchy or a collection of billionaires and trillionaires to run the world, people like others. Oh, I'm sorry about that. People that want something like that, they don't realize, apparently, that absolute power corrupts absolutely. That's not good for anybody. And it leads to something else. Many of those people think, well, if we could just gain control, we could make this fair for everybody. No, that's not how it works. That's how it works in the book. But that's not how it works in reality. In reality, what happens is they get off scot-free. And so then justice is tardy, which then promotes more injustice in society. Look with me there. In verse 11, because the sentence against an evil deed is not executed speedily. That's why our founding fathers said that you are entitled to a, what? Speedy trial. Amen. See, they knew. Because one way you get wicked people off is just by kicking it down the road. Don't hold them accountable, just keep pushing it down the road. And what Solomon is saying is, when that happens, when this happens, this happens. When these kinds of people have power and are honored by the people, and sometimes you can't help it, you don't have a choice, like North Korea or China. When this happens, this happens. Because what we see here, he says, when it's not executed speedily, the heart of the children of man is fully set to do evil, though a sinner does evil 100 times and prolongs his life. He's saying the two thoughts are related here. Solomon's reasoning is that one promotes the other. Evil leaders who are praised in life because of intimidation and admired in death because of the advantage they gained by it encourages evil and wrongdoing in the general population. Solomon says, I'm watching this. I'm observing this. And I see us praising evil people, even past their death. Which then makes us, because we didn't hold these people accountable, that's encouraged the general population to be unjust to each other. Because these got away with it, I'm going to get away with it. The sinfulness of man. See, we're in a fallen world. This is where people say, well, you can't legislate righteousness. Excuse me? Then why do you legislate at all? It's ridiculous. You don't legislate righteousness to get somebody to God. That's imputed righteousness of Christ laid to our account by faith. But in this fallen world, you better have some laws and you better execute them quickly, or you're going to have a lot of problems. Yes, you legislate. I just don't even understand how somebody, you can't legislate righteousness. All right, we'll take down every speed limit sign. Just drive whatever speed you want. You ever been in those countries? I know some of you have been. Or you've been in some of these countries where there's apparently no rules on the road. I remember I went to one city and I was in a taxi cab that did not look like it would do 100, but it was pretty close to 100. And I was like bumped Lori, and I said, "You see how fast this thing's going?" Armadillos were crossing the road. So, and then number 3, eternity will reveal the truth and reward the God-fearers. Look in verse 12. The latter part of, or the beginning of verse 12, it goes into this. He says, though a sinner does evil 100 times and prolongs his life. So he's saying they do 100 times this, and yet it seems to work out for them. They prolong their life. Remember a while back I said some people just seem too evil to die. It's that feeling. I'm speaking like Solomon here. And then that produces this. But then he says, but keep this in mind when you're trying to understand how to live under the sun in a vain world until God sets all things correctly. And that is, Though a sinner does evil 100 times and prolongs his life, yet I know that it will be well with those who fear God, because they fear before him. But it will not be well with the wicked. Neither will he prolong his days like a shadow, because he does not fear before God. A man like Judas, we looked Sunday in Mark chapter 3. We looked at the calling of the 12. Maybe you thought, why was a man like Judas? Jesus prayed all night before he called the disciples to him. Did he make a mistake? No. Why would a man like Judas Iscariot be included in the 12? Well, I can't answer all that, but I can tell you this. What happened to Judas? Did he fool Jesus? Not one day. He fooled the other disciples, but he didn't fool Jesus. And the wicked may be in honor and power and even in the houses of the holy, but they haven't fooled God. And they won't. Many will say unto me in that day, Lord, Lord, did we not do this and did we not do that? And he will say, depart from me, you that work iniquity, for I never knew you. See that? Solomon once again pulls the veil aside to reveal his true confidence. Again, Derek Kidner remarks that from this point onward, he will do more of this than maintain his cloak of secularism. Why would we expect anything else? God's Word has not been given to us to simply pontificate upon philosophical quandaries, which is sort of what we're at here, but it's given that we might see the errors of sin and turn to God in repentance to be forgiven and reconciled to Him through faith in His Son. So the truth is, Solomon he's trying to play the devil's advocate. He's coming at life from the secular, atheistic viewpoint and trying to find a reason to live and some happiness in the world. But we've seen each time that he sort of cracks a little bit and sweeps in with a little bit of his belief in God to, in many ways, redeem the day. And here he does it again. He's saying here, even though the wicked who have power and praise, maybe they prolong their life like a shadow. So, well, what does that mean? Well, you know how it is at the eve of the day, you walk out, the sun's behind you, your shadow is long. There's this picture where Solomon is kind of giving us the end of the world, as it were, the judgment, eternity. And maybe we're at the eve in the way he's thinking. And even though the wicked are powerful and they're praised and it looks like their shadow is long, they've extended their life. But does the shadow have any real substance? No. There's nothing to it. It looks longer, but there's nothing to it. He's still a mortal man. He's still the same size. He's still going to face the eternal judge. And so he says, he pulls the devil's advocate cloak off of his head and says, I still know that the righteous, those who fear God, it will go well with them. But the wicked, it will not go well with them. So in other words, he's saying that it doesn't matter in a fallen world so much what it looks like. To the secular mind, to the godless mind, the mind that doesn't fear God, it looks like we're just a bunch of losers. Paul even says in Romans chapter 8, we are slain, killed, murdered, martyred all the day long. We're like sheep lined up for the slaughter to be killed one by one by one. But is that the end of the story? No, Paul himself does the same thing, but maybe he has no veil at all. He's just beaming with the light of Christ. He comes out and says in Romans 8, this whole idea here. No. Shall anyone lay anything to the charge of God's elect? No. It's Christ that died. So what he's saying is, in this world, these people might get praised, and they may be powerful, and they may even put the righteous to death. Injustice might reign. Sin be promoted, Romans chapter 1. But in the long run, we're more than conquerors in Him who loved us. God will set this stuff straight. It's not going to happen in this world. It's not meant to happen in this world. Well, it's going to happen in this world, just not in this age. Okay, let me make that clear. It's going to happen in this world. There's a such thing as Armageddon. There's a such thing as the judgment of Christ, the return of Christ, and all of that. And that's going to happen here. It just won't happen in this age or at the end of the age. The congealed evidence of history can, at times, reveal the truth about a person or event. And from that, the wise will make a judgment and discern the truth. But history is not the judge, nor is it the final judgment day. James tells us what that is in chapter 5. He says, be patient, talking to the Christians. Be patient, therefore, brothers, until the coming of the Lord. See how the farmer waits for the precious fruit of the earth, being patient about it until it receives the early and the late rains. You also be patient. Establish your hearts, for the coming of the Lord is at hand. Do not grumble against one another, brothers, so that you may not be judged. Behold, the judge is standing at the door. As an example of suffering and patience, brothers, take the prophets who spoke in the name of the Lord. Behold, we consider those blessed who remain steadfast. You have heard of the steadfastness of Job, and you've seen the purpose of the Lord, and how the Lord is compassionate and merciful. But above all, my brothers, do not swear either by heaven or earth, or by any other oath, but let your yes be yes, and your no, no, so that you may not fall under condemnation. What's he saying? He's saying, listen, it's evening. It's evening. The judge, the Lord, is standing at the door. He's standing. That means He's getting ready to come. It's imminent. He's saying, don't take matters into your own hands. God will deal with this when He returns. He's also saying, be patient and don't turn on one another. Notice He said that. And don't turn on God by swearing and making oaths and so forth under this kind of pressure. More and more, we're in a wicked society with wicked leaders who are abusing their authorities and their privileges. And our temptation could be to act like the world. But James says, be patient. The judge is standing at the door. He's getting ready to come back. So you just be patient. He's going to set all that stuff right. There is a judge and a day set for every person to give an account of their actions. And on that day, will all accounts be settled, recompenses exacted, and rewards distributed. Until then, my dear brothers and sisters, fear God in Christ and hold your peace and rest in Him. That's what we do, because the King is coming. Let's pray.
Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to our latest video. Go ahead and click that little thumb so you can like that video, as well as on the bottom right hand corner, click that little bell to subscribe and receive notifications. Thank you again so much for tuning in, supporting our video ministry here at Coggins Church.